Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody in the world. Two chaps, many cultures. In fact, three chaps today. It's very chappy.
It's very chappy.
It's very chappy.
Yeah, you had a great female contingency throughout the week. So I just kind of want to switch the energy up, but we can switch it right back after me.
Bring it, Ben. Bring it, Ben. So, as you can see today, we are three pals, and there is a Atlanta original here. He's showing it everywhere he goes because if you don't know it yet, World Atlanta influences everything, and Bem is here to tell us how, because Atlanta culture is something that is moving the needle. Good morning, Brett. Good morning, Bem. How are you, fellas?
Doing good, fellas. Chaps.
doing fantastic. Absolutely. Beautiful day up here in Chicago. We were chatting about Bem and I were chatting a little bit before Christian joined the pre-recording here. And the synergy of how we get connected is a funny thing in this world. You know, Bem and I just connected accidentally on LinkedIn, and he was kind enough to honor me with his accepting my connection request. And then Christian in the background pings me and says, "How do you know Bem?" He's like, he's my guy, that's my guy here in Atlanta, And I said, well, I don't really know him. I just, connected through mutual connections. So welcome, Bem. It's a real honor to have you here. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
Well, and I have to be the corrective element here because I'm the German nitpicker. I don't claim anyone for me, right? So just to get that out there. And I met Bem. I think, Bem, we met at an Intercultural Atlanta event a couple of years ago.
Correct.
And then and I remember when we were talking, hey, what's your stomping ground? What's home for you? And you told me where you grew up, and like, yeah, that's 2 streets over from where I live now. So, and when we talked about identity, and Brett and I were thinking, hey, who else could we invite for this topic? I thought of you because I moved to Atlanta 3 years and change ago, and I live in a very distinct pocket of the city with its own identity. And the fact that I have moved here is changing the identity of the neighborhood because I'm a white dude with a white family moving to what used to be a very black neighborhood, and the neighborhood that you know well because you grew up here in the West End. Can you tell our audience a little bit about Atlanta's identity and maybe the specificity of the identity of your home stomping grounds, Bem?
I could make an attempt at it. So I'm 41. So, I claim Gen X. I have millennial traits, but 41, and I have to say my age because if I'm from Atlanta proper in the West End, to be specific, and I'm 41, then that means like whatever's going on in Atlanta in 86, 87, and then you got whatever stories you might have heard about Atlanta 92, 91, around the time, or maybe with 89 or 90, when the announcement was made that we had the Olympics for 96.
Right.
So I was around throughout this process, and blessed be the God around right now, but the West End specifically, aside from Cascade, so Atlanta's unique in the fact that it has many black neighborhoods throughout the city, majority black neighborhoods throughout the city. And in other cities, you still have places where they say, oh, that's the black side of town.
Right.
But we didn't really have there's a heavy black side of town, but throughout Atlanta, old Atlanta and new Atlanta to a certain extent, there are like pockets of black people really everywhere.
Right.
And so the West End, different than other black neighborhoods in the sense of immediately from the eye, and you know this well, Christian, these Victorian homes, these like amazing, amazingly built, and one of the reasons why the West End is historic, why it has a historic uh, attachment to it, is the foundation of the West End. The core of it has been around since, well, really before the Civil War. And when General Sherman burned down Atlanta, he thought the West End was so beautiful that they spared a good portion of the West End and had Union soldiers even living over there. So the similar to, if you've ever been to Savannah or seen pictures of Savannah, it's like as Atlanta continues to grow into this like new place, and at times we mistakenly tear down old in order to do so. It's the sprinkle of Atlanta that has a smidge Savannah, you know, pre-Civil War kind of
Right.
era feel,
Right.
but it's also heavy in Southwest Atlanta, a couple blocks away from Morehouse and Spelman College. You know, and it was Rastafarians, Hebrew Israelites. The elder OG of the neighborhood was a guy who used to go by the name H. Rap Brown, named Imam Jamil El Amin now, who's currently in prison trying to figure that case out. He's been there for a while. That's a whole nother Atlanta story. But you know, he and my father were friends. And so very community engagement type of community.
Yeah, let me drill in here, because this is something that I, as a foreigner who came to this country from abroad in my teenage years, and then again as an adult, this took me, and is still taking me, years to unpack, because that's a facet of U.S. culture and U.S. history that isn't taught in schools, at least not to the extent that it should be. And being of my skin complexion in this part of the city, or in this part of America, no matter whether this is Atlanta or any other part of the United States where I am a minority, finding out about this is tiring for those who I ask, because I come to my black neighbors and my black friends and I ask them all these questions, and they say, do your own homework. We're done explaining this stuff to you. And I get that. However, I still have that curiosity. So how do we further that dialogue? I mean, we're in times of unrest again in this country, unfortunately. And there seems to be very little dialogue happening across a divide that is deepened by mass media and by the powers in charge. So how do we, at a peer level, how do we keep that conversation going between what others might call the other, or the different people, or I don't want to put labels on it. How do we keep that dialogue going? How can we engage in a conversation that furthers both our intelligence and our knowledge about each other?
Well, I guess I could say, you know, on a national level, legalize cannabis and
Okay.
you know, create spaces for Black folks to get equity
There we go.
in the cannabis game. Like that's major. But nah, but yes. So it's yes and. Let me be real. Yes and. So after that, or what we can do currently while that's a process is, you know, take a step back. And I know we all don't have the outright ability to do it, but I think you can tap into it. And it's there are certain situations in life that require a 300-foot view, like right up on it, and then the 3,000. So it's like, and I'm gonna show my age here when I start talking about batteries. You know what I'm saying? Like, but
you're in good company. We're old farts all together.
But you know the spring, you know the spring and the battery, and how it's small at the top, and then you know it gets, so that springy ability. And I say that because now at a higher rate than before, not many of us as full-fledged adults with adult responsibilities could be on social media responding with long diatribes on a daily basis unless that was somewhat part of your way of making money somehow.
Mm-hmm.
But now, quarantine, COVID, like we are receiving a lot of information at a higher rate, and you're just there getting it and glued in, and that can be overwhelming. So it's just, hate to again be the old guy in the room and say, well, turn off the computer, read a book, but it's like take a step back and have a lot of self-reflection. So that's inside self, but your own people. So I'm a branding guy, and I mean, Christian, yeah, you saying you're white, but you are. I'm from the South, like the dirty South. Like white. I know white. I'm white. That's what I know. You're not white. You're German. You know what I'm saying? Like, and being black from Atlanta and talking, like, dealing with somebody of German descent about race in Atlanta, you're on another level because I don't know a whole hell of a lot about Germany. Again, you know what I know about Germany. You can.
So are you saying that just because I didn't grow up here as a white person, my perspective on stuff here going on in the United States is that of an outsider, and I may not have the same baggage as other white people in this country? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, to a certain extent, we still trying to figure you out, friend or foe, yo. Who are you? You know what I'm saying? Like, because the American white, that is, and that's friend or foe. Like, not one is not inclusive, exclusive, excuse me, to the others.
Right.
To each his own, but there's we have a certain history, and it's crazy because from a African American black state of mind, it's like, well, you can ask, well, what's the first thing come to mind when you hear I'm from Germany? I mean, you could probably, I'm like, oh, that's some Hitler shit. But it's, can I curse? Can I curse? No.
You just did, and it's cool.
Okay. But that's not true, obviously. But when I look at everything in my day-to-day life as a black man in America, but more specifically a black man in Atlanta, and just the process of things, Germany doesn't cross my mind what you might be going through.
Right.
I just like, hey, that's them over there. I don't know. I don't even, my purview is a white American, and then everybody. But yeah, now to your point though, if we didn't talk, we were walking towards each other. Yes, I mean you look like a white American. I had to tell a Jewish friend of mine, like, you're Jew, but like far, like you're a white guy. If I'm right there,
the first thing you see is the skin color, right?
Yeah,
and But that is why I almost, I don't want to say I force that conversation on people, but I'm super aggressive, as you can tell, and Brett knows me about in that regard too. I often go into conversation, especially with African Americans, with that question because I sense it is looming there somewhere, and I'd rather address it right now. And but I want to ask Brett because when you read Bem's hat right there, Atlanta influences everything. Brett, when you read this, Atlanta influences everything, how would you, as somebody who lives in Chicago, see Atlanta being influential past its cityscape?
Well, I watched Bem's TED Talk yesterday because I know TED the TED Talk, so I thought this is a great. I watch a lot of TED Talks, and this is a great way to look at what somebody's message is, right? So, and I just in that short 10 minutes or 15 minutes of it, so insightful to go, you know what? Yeah, you're right. I can see this happening. There was such a strength. What I found, and I just want to say this out loud, is there was such a kind of quiet, humble strength that came from Bem on that stage. And I kind of thought, well, that's interesting. Whenever I've gone to Atlanta and I've heard there's not the brashness that comes from an LA or a Chicago or there's not that maybe that is the essence of Atlanta, but it just knows it influences everything, right? But all the brands. I mean, we're talking about, you're a branding guy, Bem. This is we're business people, and the brands that exist there. But you went into the how management or upper management executive levels in these companies come from the outside. They don't come from Atlanta. And you talked about the upward mobility percentage of African Americans in Atlanta, which is, again, it's probably a similar story in all of the country, but there's so much to be done. I think that Atlanta is, from what I've heard from people, I know other people that live there, they really enjoy the place. And but I think it's kind of like a well-kept secret. And is there some of that? Does Atlanta, on us, Bem, that does Atlanta suffer from its own humility in not putting it out there? I don't know. As a brand guy, what you're actually doing the job of doing that,
I love I want to know something's going on in Christian's head when you were talking. So his few, however you described Atlanta, the last couple of sentences, something got in Christian, because I guess he's now living the Atlanta experience. So there's something there.
Well, I have the outside experience, right? So I see Atlanta as the historical thing, and it is also, I experience it as Black Mecca, because I've been to other cities in the United States, and what Brett said, the New York or LA or whatever big metropolises we look at in the U.S., Black Atlanta doesn't need to brag, because this is the city where Black people make it without being apologetic about it, or without having to flaunt it as much and show each other, hey, look, I can make it. Because here, I don't want to say in Atlanta, it's taken for granted that you can make it as a Black person. Nothing in life is for granted. But here, it doesn't surprise people anymore. At least that's the vibe that I'm getting. Am I about right? Or am I too idealistic here?
No, you're right, but it gets the we don't control our narrative as well as those cities that you both mentioned. And so it's kind of insert your Atlanta narrative here along with, what folks really feel it to be, along with what it really is. And then you can like build your narrative around it, which is part of the attraction, because it's like it's like gift and curse on so many ends. But in these other markets, it's going to be tough for you to go there and build a narrative around what those markets are and convince other people that, it's that as well. Like their brands, they're such old American cities, and that was going back. That was one of the part of the purpose of me explaining my age, because although Atlanta, it was called Terminus before, and Georgia was a slave-holding state, so one of the original 13 colonies. On the other end of the Civil War, in the South lost, so Atlanta's in the South, so it didn't progress in the more the modern era, the other side of the new history of the U.S. So in that time frame, Chicago, Detroit, you had these like urban epicenters, but Atlanta was a main stronghold. It had everything. It was a railroad town, but it was an intersecting place. So we had good bones and infrastructure going into the 20th century or whatever. I'm not good with all of that, but that on the other end of the Civil War, you know what I'm saying? We had, even being burnt down, and that's where the Phoenix came in. We had good bones and infrastructure, so something could happen here that might take out another city. And it's just like, give us a minute, we'll be back. Now, what we come back as, who knew? But once after the Civil War, and African Americans, it's like, okay, I have sharecropping skills because you weren't supposed to read. So there were a lot of us that didn't know how to read. But when Morris Brown and that what's now known as the Atlanta University Center was built here, and you wanted to really, okay, I'm in America. Like, I've seen that white people, like, they don't do just sharecropping. Like, they do other stuff. Like, I want to do other stuff. I'm now in America, and my name used to be Kunta Kinte, but now it's Toby. I guess I got to be this Toby guy, you know. So, what do you do to be the Toby guy? Well, it looks like white people go to school. Well, let me go to school. And so it's forever for a Black person, not an African, like the African American, which I guess you two, it's not a real race, right? What is an African American, you know? And so versus any other immigrant, and I'm going somewhere, versus any other immigrant that fled, like Bosnia could have fled, like the cartels in Mexico, like you're coming to America, you know, I gotta make it. The empathy, because I'm human and the way I was raised and I'm Southern, polite, like, yo, that's messed up, bro. Damn, that was what was going on in Bosnia. You know what I'm saying? Damn, like even for my Jewish friends, yo, the Holocaust, like, yo, and then you do the slavery. It's like, oh, wow, y'all, yeah, slavery. But then there's even more, you know what I'm saying? Because wherever you fled to America with that last name that could be traced back to your great, like ancestor, the whatever recipe you're cooking with from Bosnia in America, that's the recipe that go way back. That's what you was able to stuff in your pants when you couldn't come with nothing. But
you don't have that recipe, do you?
Man, like, because what's a Toby, right? And what's a Toby? Or you've been in the West End, Christian. You already know where I'm gonna go. What's a Daquan? You know what I'm saying? Everybody know the Black joke names. You know what I'm saying? Now my name, and I should have said this earlier, accent mark over the E at times. I don't put it there. Is Bem, like name, but in Swahili it means peace. But my parents had, as African Americans, they had to do a little bit more to seek that Afrocentric knowledge so that I could try to have some semblance of a name to go back from where we're from. But they had to go figure that out on their own. And so all of that to say is that Atlanta, it's a huge, largely transient place. There are a lot of Blacks that were born here, then Blacks that came from other, because of like the Mecca thing. But the Blacks that were born here kind of just tilled the soil. They weren't able to go to Harlem or whatever and they had to stay and deal with it. You know, they weren't able to escape it. But what that did was build a strong, resilient base that now what you're looking at with, you know, Andrew Young, who's a transplant, John Lewis transplant, you know,
may he rest in power.
Yeah, like, but you're looking at either the children, grandchildren of that. Well, I could do this, you know, because we were able to see some greatness and feel like you could see it kind of permeate throughout the city. And then when you see how we landed the Olympics and certain things, you could tie that back to your Blackness. It's like, yo, we have something here. And so the John Lewis, Dr. King dust just is still it's still out in the air. You know what I'm saying? It's still out in the air. So, but we're number one in income inequality, so we got some work to do.
Bem, I feel that we need to further this conversation in the future with a couple of more people. Let's put together a panel, because I think this is a conversation or a story that needs to be told from various angles and various vantage points.
Most definitely.
And I really appreciate you taking time this morning. We went long today, brother. I got to hop off. I will see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. Brett, take it from here. Two chaps, many cultures.
Thanks, Bem. I appreciate it, man. That was great.
Yo, thank y'all. Thank y'all.